Om Shanti. So, welcome all of you. And before we begin, let's invoke the presence of the Supreme Being for a minute. So, welcome all of you to the episode 41st of the Values for Life series. And it gives me immense pleasure to let you all know that today's value coincides with the theme which we have at Brahma Kumaris once a year, which is decided at the annual meeting. So the theme this time is on how to inculcate spirituality in lives, and also by the inculcation of two important virtues or values, compassion and mercy. So as all of you know, we had covered mercy already. It was Sister Jayanti who had given that talk, and we have with us our very dear sweet brother Charlie, all the way from Australia to cover on compassion. So before I pass it on to him and the others for the formal welcoming, let me just introduce Brother Charlie in short. All of you know a lot about him, so I won't tell you in detail. He is the national coordinator of the Brahma Kumaris in Australia and also the chairman of its board of directors. Brother Charlie grew up in Melbourne and studied architecture at the Melbourne University, and whereby after that he felt an inner urge to explore various spiritual philosophies, and that led him to meet our old administrative head Dadi Janki around in mid 70s. So 1975, Charlie brother came in touch with the Brahma Kumaris in London, where he learned meditation. And after that, there is no looking back, because now he is coordinating the activities of almost 40 big centers in Australia, and including 3 retreat centers as well. So let me just start with a few lines in the form of a poem for him. So Brother Charlie is indeed one of the Supreme's choice, because he's got so much of divinity in his voice, which indeed helps us to stop our inner noise and gives the soul a chance to rejoice. As you can see, he carries himself with so much of poise that wonderstrucks equally all the girls and boys, who then stop playing their life with perishable toys and then ride on the life journey as if in a Rolls Royce. So with this, I'll now move on to today's value, which is on compassion. So from today's talk, let's develop this passion for each other. Let's show some compassion, because life otherwise is full of frustration with Maya's full force and invasion. As war strikes with fuel prices soaring inflation, drama tests our patience in gradation. So let's try to develop now in life this innovation and help each other with the ultimate Almighty's salvation. So with this, I would now request Sister Claudia to welcome Brother Charlie. Over to you, Sister Claudia.
Good evening from our side, Charlie Bye. And I think good afternoon for you and good morning for many, like those who are in Europe. They are right at the beginning of the morning. So welcome to everyone. Welcome to you. It's so nice to see you talking about compassion, because we need to have compassion for ourselves and also share that compassion for others. And I think you are so good to speak about this. And I'm really looking forward to hear that from you. So I like to just offer you some flowers because we are now in the springtime. So that is for you. You are
Thank
coming
you.
to Vancouver, the airport. Yeah. And I'm going to see you there. Oh, nice to see you, brother.
S- So thank you, Sister Claudia. And before we give it to Brother Charlie, I would just like to announce that we have interpretation in 7 languages, as you can click on the interpretation icon and see, choose for yourself. As usual, almost the first 50 minutes to 1 hour will be the talk, and then you can start sending your questions to me directly in the chat box rather than typing to everyone. And followed by the Q&A, we'll have a closing meditation on compassion with Brother Charlie. So all yours, over to you, Brother Charlie. Thank you so much once again.
So thank you so much, Manoj Bhai, and thank you, Claudia, and the whole team. It's so lovely to be with you, and I think I was just noticing it's 41 episodes, which is, I think, an extraordinary effort to offer this beautiful series about virtues and values. So as Manoj Bhai was saying, I'd just love to share some of my thoughts and would love to have some time for interaction and questions. And then we'll finish with some meditation. I think you all know the format. We are all plugged into the global media, and we watch everything happening around the world from the comfort of our lounge rooms. You know, we all have our TV and we turn on our TV and watch the news, and we see extraordinary images almost every day. Sometimes of war and sometimes of disaster, sometimes tsunamis, sometimes earthquakes, all sorts of things. And we watch, you know, people who have lost their homes, people who have lost their relatives, people who are searching for family members. We watch lines of refugees. We see all of these images on our television on a daily basis. And sometimes the cameras take us right into those people's faces, and we can see right into the hearts of their pain and suffering. And I wonder how you feel. How do you feel inside? Does it seem real, or does it sometimes seem like another reality television show? You know, how does it really feel inside when you see the suffering of our world family, which we see on a daily basis? Do you sometimes feel a bit helpless and hopeless because often we feel we can't do much? Or maybe you feel a bit desensitized. We see so much of it that sometimes it's hard to feel really affected or influenced by it. Or maybe sometimes you feel a bit upset or angry that so much seems to happen which could be avoided. Or sometimes maybe you just want to turn off that television. You've had enough. You can't bear to see anymore. I wonder how you feel when you really watch the suffering of our human family. Or perhaps these most human of all feelings, which is to have a sense of compassion, emerges inside of you. I have a friend here in Australia who's a journalist, and he was saying to me once that he thought the biggest problem in our world, and our world has a lot of problems, as you all know, he feels the biggest crisis in humanity is that we have lost our compassion for each other. Sometimes it seems that we are so selfish or self-absorbed in our lives that it's so difficult to extend that compassion for the other. And yet it seems that most people, so many people feel They're struggling to survive in their own lives, and they just don't have the energy to offer compassion to others. And yet, I would say of almost all human feelings, compassion defines us as a human being, to really reach out and connect with the other, to offer understanding and support for those around me. And yet, I think for most of us, seeing the world situation, which seems to get worse day by day, we do feel a bit helpless and feel we can't do much. So the real question for me about this subject of compassion, do I have that day-to-day compassion for those that I interact with on a daily basis, my immediate family and my work colleagues? Sometimes I feel we can sit at home watching the TV and we see what's happening in Ukraine, for instance, and we can feel so much compassion for those people, that global compassion. And yet there's someone sitting in the room with me, a family member, who's suffering. Do I really acknowledge their suffering? Do I feel support for their suffering? As you know, 1 in 3 of us these days has some form of mental health issue, maybe depression, maybe anxiety. Do I extend my compassion to them? Because it seems to me it's much more challenging to have this day-to-day compassion for those that I really know well than those that I don't really know, that I see on the television. And I remember once that one of the Brahma Kumaris sisters who was living in Turkey, she was telling me, and you may remember, it's quite a long time ago now, but there was a huge earthquake in Turkey and tens of thousands of people passed away. And she said for a whole week, they just stayed at home. They couldn't go out. And on the day that she could leave her home, she went down to the water, the Bosphorus. Istanbul's a very, very beautiful city. And she was going for a walk. And as she was walking, there was a car accident. 2 men had a crash. And she said, like all big cities in the world, usually people will get out of their cars, argue, blame each other, even physically fight. And she said she saw this extraordinary scene that these 2 men hopped out of their cars, came up to each other and embraced each other. They hugged each other. Because the compassion had come out. Everyone was suffering. Everyone had lost relatives. Everyone was finding life difficult. And so they offered that compassion to each other. And, sometimes I have a question, why isn't it always there? Why is it that sometimes we seem to have to go through such big problems and big challenges that the compassion emerges? But one thing I have learned, that it sits inside all of us, the capacity to have compassion for others sits inside all of us. It's just that how easy is it to bring it out? Do we have to wait for disasters and huge challenges? Or do I live on a day-to-day basis with my compassion? And what is compassion? To me, it's like an understanding or empathy for another's suffering. In the Latin language, compassion really means co-suffering. In a way, I'm relating to what you are going through. To me, compassion is one of the most fundamental expressions of love. It's one of the most natural ways to show my love for another. And in a way, it's an active desire to alleviate the suffering of those around me. And if you look into all the great traditions of our world, the great religions of our world, usually compassion is one of the most obvious expressions of love for God. In Buddhism, there's a story about Buddha, that one of his main disciples asked him a question. And he said, would you say that loving kindness and compassion is part of our practice? And Buddha said no. Loving kindness and compassion is not part of our practice. Loving kindness and compassion is all of our practice. And when you think of it, how does spirituality come out? If I really love God, if I'm a spiritual person, how does that emerge? It will emerge with that loving kindness and compassion for the other. Even in the Quran, and I have read all the scriptures of the world, in the Quran, if my memory serves me, there's well over 100 verses, like something like 114. And 113 verses of the Quran begin with the words, in the name of the compassionate and merciful one. It's almost like the main quality attributed to God in the Quran. And you know, if I look at my own life and how I feel, I would say that the thing that really, whenever I feel compassion, I really feel healthy inside. It just feels, this is how life is supposed to be, to offer that empathy, that understanding, that support, that love for the other. And to me, compassion is a form of selflessness. It doesn't want anything. It only wants to give and support. But one of the most beautiful things about true compassion is that it suspends judgment and offers, in a sense, a non-judgmental love towards the other. Because it's very easy to say, goodness, don't you realize why you're suffering? Can't you see what you have done to create this situation in your life? In a way, true compassion is like a decision that I don't focus on the reasons. I see that you are suffering, so I just offer a compassionate attitude. And there's a lovely story about a man who was traveling in a train, and he had his 2 children with him. And the children were running around the train, screaming, yelling, jumping on chairs, banging things. And all the other passengers were getting extremely upset, not so much with the children, but with the father. And it went on for a while. And so in the end, one of the passengers sort of snapped at the father and said, what sort of parent are you to allow your children to behave in this way? Because the man was just staring out the window as the train was going, ignoring his children's behavior. And then he turned to this person and said very, very quietly, well, I've just come from the hospital and the children's mother has just died. And I think, you know how in life, instantly, that very judgmental, critical human mind just turned in a second to compassion. And so often I think about that we make a lot of assumptions about other people and why they're behaving in the way they do. And yet often when we know the truth, we let go these assumptions and these judgments, and we really begin to offer them compassion. So compassion for me has a selflessness. Compassion suspends judgment. And compassion really is an aspect of humility. Because rather than thinking, well, I'm okay and you're not okay, there's the feeling you are my brother, you are my sister, and I feel I would like to offer support for you. And so it's a really beautiful quality. And I wonder, when do you feel these feelings of compassion emerge in you? For me, I've been a meditator now for 47 years. What I love to do is sit in the early morning as a child, sit in front of the Supreme Soul, sit in front of God, and allow myself to be loved by God. To me, that's the supreme life experience. And I observe myself, because spirituality is this wonderful self-observation. You observe how you respond. The more I feel loved, the more I feel belonging, the more my compassion grows. I would say that the most natural response for a love for God is to have compassion for my human family. And really look at a lot of the great people in this world, the Mother Teresas of the world, as I often call them, who dedicate their life to compassion. Where does it come from? I would say the seed is a deep, deep love for God. And when we have that deep love for God, the deeper the love, the more it seems to elicit this compassion. And yet in saying that, I think there's a lot of questions that arise in me about compassion. Does compassion have limits? Does compassion really have limits? Am I always compassionate? Am I compassionate for some and not for others? And once I was in Africa and I was talking to a judge, and she was telling me she was always in court with people who perform crimes. And she was openly saying that really, as a judge, I really try to be compassionate. It's the role of a judge not to be judgmental, so to speak, but to offer compassion. But she said there's one group of people I can't feel compassion for, and that is pedophiles, abusers of children. And she wasn't actually judging the pedophile. She was looking at herself. Why can't I feel a compassion for all? Because in life, sometimes we have compassion for the oppressed, for the poor, for the powerless, but we have anger for the oppressors, the rich, and the powerful. And so, do you think it's possible to have compassion for all? Not only the oppressed, but the oppressors. Not only the poor, but the rich. Not only the powerless, but the powerful. Is it possible? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because once I went to a talk with the Dalai Lama, and he was giving a talk in Sydney. And as he was giving his talk, near the end of his talk, he asked for questions. And a young Chinese man stood up, because as you know, China has taken over Tibet. And he said to the Dalai Lama, "Do you hate the Chinese?" He said it that strongly. And the Dalai Lama said, "No, I don't." And the young man said, "I don't believe you. You must, because they've chopped down all the trees. There's been a lot of violence and very unpleasant things happen in Tibet." And then the Dalai Lama said, "No, because my understanding of the law of karma is that when you behave in that way, when you oppress or you treat people badly, then the law of karma means that we will reap that fruit in the future. So if we oppress now, often we feel oppressed in the future too. So I have compassion. If I'm giving suffering now, often that means that I will reap the fruit of that in the future." And so, sometimes I think that what he was really saying, I have compassion for the oppressed and the oppressors. I have compassion for everybody, which God does too. Or sometimes, is my compassion, another question, is it selective? Have you noticed that sometimes you can have compassion for one family member and not another? Sometimes you seem to have a lot of compassion for one group in the community or society or the world and not other groups. Sometimes you have compassion for one friend and not another. And strangely, in human nature, it seems that the more we become familiar with people, we know them as they really are, the harder it is to really offer compassion. And I think this is why spiritual people can be compassionate, because a true state of spirituality is to be very, very loving, caring, compassionate, but detached. And it seems to me that the more I'm detached, which really means to be loving and caring, but uninfluenced by, I can offer compassion. The more I'm influenced by other people, the harder it is for me to really begin to offer compassion. Or perhaps we would say, does my compassion exhaust me? That's another question. I know a social worker here, and she was telling me once that I said to her, how are you going? And she said, oh, I've got compassion burnout. I'd never heard that expression before, compassion burnout. And she said, it's just people are so needy. It never, never stops. You know, Dr. Manoj is a doctor, and I think the people in the caring professions, they're just amazing because the demands on them just are exponential at the moment. And this poor woman said, I'm just not coping anymore. I have this compassion burnout. I feel exhausted. Or sometimes, you know, is my compassion condescending? I'm okay, but you're not okay. Or even I think sometimes my compassion can be based on guilt. Somehow I feel responsible for your suffering. So it's a wonderful quality, but perhaps there's many, many questions that emerge. But you know, my observation is that life is an amazing teacher. Life is an incredible teacher. And sometimes experiences of life make us compassionate. My own life experience withdraws my capacity to really offer compassion to others. And you know, once I was in the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris in Mount Abu, and there was a wonderful man from the UK called Lord David Ennals. He was from the House of Lords, a very, very dear friend of the BKs. And actually, I was teaching him meditation, giving him the meditation course. And one morning I went over at sunrise to where he was staying, and we sat outside on the veranda watching the sunrise. It was just beautiful, so peaceful. And he told me his story, because he was one of the people who began the League of Nations, which became the United Nations. He was one of the great supporters of the United Nations. He was one of the first people to support the Dalai Lama and so many causes around the world. His life was like a monument to compassion for the poor and the underprivileged in the world. And he told me an incredible story that brought out that sense of compassion in his life. But when he was just 18, he joined the British Army during the Second World War. And just as a young man, just out of school, he was a paratrooper and he was dropped into France when the war, you know, the Second World War. And in the middle of the night, he said, with the other young men the same age as me, we were dropped into France, and we were crawling across fields, coming to little stone walls and looking over and then crawling. And he said we did that for a few hours. And then just before dawn, he said he came to a little stone wall and he stood up in front of this little stone wall to crawl over it. And there was actually a German behind it. And as soon as he stood up, he shot him and shot off the top of his shoulder. And he just dropped down. And he said, I was lying there bleeding, thinking, well, if I move or make a noise, he's going to come around and finish me. And after dawn, a little while, the German came round. And as David told me, Lord Ennals told me, the young German, he said he was the same age as me. He was feeling worse than me. He was so like shocked that he had shot somebody that, and they talked. And David realized he wasn't the enemy at all. He wasn't the enemy. he was just like me, a young man who wanted a life, wanted a career, just wanted a normal life, but somehow he had been caught up. And then David said, I realize the absolute futility of war when I met him. And that scene changed his life. And he literally he had to go to prisoner of war camp, etc. And he always had a damaged shoulder his whole life. But that scene changed the destiny of his life. And he realized that no one's my enemy. All the human family, I can have, are my brothers I have compassion for. I once also gave a meditation course to a man in Australia who was like a film director. And he became incredibly successful internationally. And he said that the more he became successful, the more money he made. He just lived a very hedonistic life, drank a lot, began to drink so much, etc., that it affected his job. And after a while, his whole life fell into pieces.
Om
He lost
Shanti
his
Charlie,
work.
brother. To disturb you, could you slow down a little bit? The translators are feeling a bit overwhelmed. It's a bit fast. Thank you, brother.
I should have compassion for the translators. Please remind me when I'm speaking too fast. I'll try to remember. Anyway, this man was telling me that he became an alcoholic. And he said that he really reached the bottom from being so successful and, famous, wealthy. He had nothing. And he went through a very, very low period. But when he started to get better, he began to help other people with addiction. And now he travels the world helping people with addiction. And he said to me that he had to reach the lowest point to find his real purpose and really find compassion for others. So sometimes when we reach a low point, we learn about, others and what they go through and their suffering, and it brings out my compassion. Even I remember an oncologist, a doctor who said that many times people would come to see him and say that they were having a bad experience in the medical system. You often hear this, and he said so many times I heard patients say they weren't enjoying going from doctor to doctor when they were sick. And he said for years and years and years, he heard these complaints. Then he got cancer. And he had to go through the medical system himself. And he said it completely changed me. I started to have compassion for everybody because I began to realize as a doctor, I'm not just treating a body, I'm treating a person. And he said, I also had to have the experience of my patients to really offer compassion to everyone around me. And so it is amazing, isn't it, that we actually have life experiences that withdraw my capacity to perhaps have compassion for others. But where does compassion begin? We all know it begins with having compassion for me. I would say self-compassion is one of the most important things in life. And if I was to ask you, how do you treat yourself? Absolutely honestly, how do you talk to yourself in your mind? What is your self-talk? Are you loving? Are you gentle? Are you forgiving? Are you compassionate? Or do you sometimes talk very harshly to yourself? very critically. Do you put yourself down? Do I really show compassion towards myself? Because really my experience is it's hard to extend genuine compassion to others if I don't have it for myself. And when I do this internal journey to experiencing who I am, I often feel that all of us at this time have three personalities sitting inside of us. I would say two of them aren't very compassionate, but one of them really begins to emerge a genuine compassion for myself and for others. The first personality I call the I of arrogance, the I of superiority. This personality takes all its sense of identity from the labels of my body. Who am I? A whole set of labels: my gender, my nationality, my culture, my religion, my profession, hundreds of labels. What's common to all of those labels? They are temporary. And when the I of arrogance, the I of superiority, is ruling my inner system, what happens? I compare with others. And I think, I am better, I know more, I am right. And when it comes into my feelings, when my ego is ruling inside, then that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. And when I'm feeling all these emotions, when my ego is ruling, I don't have much compassion for others. I have a lot of judgment, actually. I'm quite critical, I'm quite judgmental of those around me. So that first personality, which is born from this sense of my identity being a temporary body. The more I think I'm a temporary body, the more ego I have, and the less compassion I can have. The second personality is the ego of inferiority. The ego, which is like a lack of self-respect. This is the powerful I actually at the moment. And this identity also takes my whole sense of self from the labels of my body. And when it's ruling my inner world, it's the opposite. I think in the opposite way. Others are better, others know more. Others don't love me, others don't respect me. And when this lack of self-respect, this ego of inferiority is dominating me, that's when I feel hopeless about myself, inadequate, not good enough, unworthy, inferior. And therein this I is ruling. I have no self-compassion. I tell myself I'm a failure. I tell myself I'm no good. I tell myself I'm hopeless. This has such a debilitating effect on the quality of my life, and it affects each and every part of my life. So what often happens is I just fluctuate between my ego and my lack of self-respect. And the result, no compassion for the self and none for others. But when I really understand and experience the third I, the original I, the soul. And that soul is absolutely extraordinary. Even though I've been, in a sense, meditating on this for 3/4 of my life, I'm still absolutely fascinated. Science is telling us these days that this body is made up of around 40 trillion cells. Can you believe that? It's just an unimaginable number. the soul is more subtle than one cell. The soul is more subtle than one of those cells. How subtle am I? And I, this soul, have lived before this body. I'm going to continue after this body. I am immortal, non-physical, eternal. This is who I really am. And none of the labels of my body really describe me. I'm not a male or female, and I'm not European or Asian, and all these labels which we all receive actually come with my temporary self, not with my permanent self. And really, I think that when I reconnect with myself as the soul, not the image of the body and the labels of the body, no, I start to have a relationship with myself as the permanent self, the consciousness. Life changes dramatically. It's like I look through a whole different lens. I see a whole different existence and what's important. When I look through the lens of my temporary body, I start to see what's important is material gain and being respected and noticed and acknowledged. But when I look through the lens of who I really am, I see what is important is really to have the highest quality thoughts, the highest quality feelings, the highest quality actions, because only this goes forward. When I die, not one material thing will go with me, not my body even, or my relationships. So it's an indicator where to put intention in my life now. This is having compassion for myself, to really give time to me, give time to my spiritual development, give time to create quality thoughts and feelings. And out of those quality thoughts and feelings, to behave well, and to act according to my higher self. I think compassion for me is really to learn to meditate, to live a simple and pure life, and to heal. It's essential. In fact, I would say the loudest voice at this time is the voice that says, give time to the self. It is not selfish. The more I heal, I grow, I transform, I feel close to God, the more I will have compassion for myself, and I can offer compassion to others. Because first, I really need to give compassion to the self. But then also, I need to give compassion to those I live and work with. Like I was saying, that's not so easy. I know them well. I know their faults. I know everything about them intimately. And yet I would say the greatest act of love is to know the value of others. To me, the greatest gift I can give to a person I love is to hold their value in my attitude, to really value them. The woman who was the head of the Brahma Kumaris for 38 years, Dadi Prakashmani, was absolutely extraordinary in this way. Everyone she met, she held their value in her attitude. They felt uplifted. This is real compassion, seeing the beauty in another. There's no greater gift I can give to another person. But I not only need compassion for the self, compassion for those I live and work with on a daily basis. I need to even have compassion to those who don't agree with me, and allow people to have a different perspective. I have my own views of life, but allow other people to have their view, give them, they're allowed to have their perspective on life. Sometimes to feel that others should think like me. But I think one of the great wisdoms of life, perhaps one of the great compassions of life, is to accept difference. Allow people to be different. You know, what do they say in the 4 phases of groups? There's forming, storming, norming, and performing. We come together forming, superficial. The second phase, storming, differences will emerge. We are all different. It's actually normal. It's absolutely normal. But how do we move from storming to norming? In a family, in a group, in a workplace, when we accept difference. If I always think, you should think like me, you should behave like me, you should see life in the way I perceive life, I'm always going to come in conflict with others. But a form of compassion is to respect that you are different, and that's great. Actually, I feel the more we have self-respect, the more we can respect others and allow them to be different from me. You know, why is the world in so much conflict? Because this group feels you should think like me. You should believe what I believe in. You should dress like me. If you look different, I feel threatened because you're different from me. Unfortunately, the more people feel threatened, it's a sign we lack self-respect. So I have compassion for myself. I have compassion for those I live and work with. I have compassion for those who are different, who think differently. And I have compassion really for the whole world. Really, this whole world is my family. How do I think that? When I see that everyone is a soul, I absolutely love this. Go beyond the labels and see where we have a point of connection. We are all souls. And the more I have the ego of my body, the harder it is to have compassion for the other. But the more I become soul conscious, the natural response is really to have compassion and love for the other. We are a human family. And really, where does all of compassion stem from? I think, as we were touching on, it's my love for God. I would say one of the byproducts of a relationship with God is to have this compassion for everyone around me. And really at the heart of what the Brahma Kumaris offer is a loving relationship with God, to remember God. And these days, sometimes I feel for many people, meditation's a challenge. Because sometimes that word implies I have to change my consciousness. I have to sort of step out of a low state into a higher state. And when we sit to meditate and that doesn't happen, deep down, many people feel I can't meditate. I'm not good at meditation. And this is why we love to use the word to remember God. Because when I remember, 3 things happen. First, I connect. Second, I'm influenced. Third, I have a feeling. Remembering is absolutely natural. As I've been talking, you've been remembering family members, remembering what you have to do, remembering many things. You are constantly remembering. You constantly plug in, connect. You're then influenced and you have a feeling. And what are we saying here? If I connect with God, I remember God as the supreme soul, a point source of life energy, but an unlimited ocean of love, peace, purity, and power. When I connect, I'm influenced by that soul. Naturally, I'm influenced by that love, that peace, that purity, just like I'm influenced by a human soul. And when I'm influenced, it's almost like I download the feelings of God into me. that love, that peace, that power, and definitely that compassion. I absolutely, tangibly notice that when I remember God and I feel that sense of closeness, like the lover of the soul, my compassion for the other just grows. I can see it growing. And I would say really the key to compassion is to feel close to God, to feel loved by God, and to remember God. And when I do, I have that compassion for myself. And really, I offer this amazing sense of love, compassion, support to everyone. I really feel that this is so necessary in our world at the moment. Look at our world. It's just so much judgment. Look at the media, judging everyone. There's just so much judgment between countries, so much judgment between communities, so much judgment in families, and even so much judgment within ourselves, of ourselves. Compassion really makes me feel much better about who I am. My experience is that if I'm judging people, deep down, I don't feel so comfortable about who I am. Deep down, I don't feel comfortable about myself. But when I offer compassion, genuine compassion and respect, I feel much better about who I am. So I'm going to have compassion for all of you, listening. And if there's any questions, comments, any statements even, it's lovely just to have a little bit of interaction or dialogue. And I can see Manoj, emerging Manoj Pai. So thank you so much, Manoj.
I'm so sorry, the spotlight and all that automatically happens in the background. People do it, and I didn't
It's
mean
fine.
to disturb.
No,
And I
it's
didn't.
perfect timing. Perfect timing.
Okay. And I actually wanted those people to send their all the participants to send their questions to remind them. Right. Okay. So fantastic sharing on compassion. You mentioned about compassion in the medical profession. So I have a few questions, and also a few doctors from the audience have a few questions. You very well you touched this topic beautifully about compassion burnout, and we also call it compassion fatigue. I mean, in the medical profession, when we take these, particularly the Vihasa workshops on compassion, there's a big module on compassion we do for them. So there's always a tussle and a tug of war whether should medical professionals be empathetic or sympathetic, sympathy or empathy. So do you want to tell us the differences?
Yeah, I think that, or I suppose everyone has their own perception of these things. But, when I feel sympathy for others, I actually, in a sense, relate to their suffering, identify with their suffering. But empathy is more like a sense that I can, retain my own sense of value, but I still feel for you and what you're going through, without perhaps, taking on the burden of that suffering in that way. Because I think that in spirituality, perhaps we would call it detached and loving once again, that I think really at this time, detachement's an essential virtue, essential for life, but it's the most misunderstood virtue in life as well. Because to me, detachment, it means to be very loving, very caring, very understanding, very compassionate, but uninfluenced by I don't take on the other's story, but I empathize or sympathize with their story in that sense. So I don't feel burdened by it, because I think we have enough of our own issues. We all have enough of our own issues. So if I take on your issues as well, what happens to me? So detachment spiritually is a very important way of managing this world, surviving in this world. But accurate detachment to me means not aloof, not cut off, not disconnected. I'm very understanding, compassionate, loving, but I'm uninfluenced by. And I think this is a very important thing, whether I'm a medical professional or just a human being surviving in this world at the moment. Yeah.
Great. I'll just take another question from the chat box. A doctor is asking, as you mentioned about the oncologist, when he himself when he had to undergo all that entire process in the hospital, going from here and there, he started developing self-compassion. This doctor is raising another question about doctor shopping. Like people go for they go for second opinions, third opinions, and they don't respect my opinion, the first opinion which they got. So how do I develop compassion for them? And when and when they come back to me finally.
And I suppose along with that is Dr. Google too. They come to someone who's been a medical professional for 30 years and start to tell you, you're wrong, Dr. Google says this, which I imagine would be, I think let's have two states of mind. One is, this person's doctor shopping, and I can feel a bit frustrated. I can feel, annoyed, upset in a sense. Or I can see the soul and I can look beyond the behavior and see that this soul is suffering, this soul is struggling. Why are they behaving in this way? And if I have the capacity to be so compassionate, to see the soul and see what is prompting this doctor shopping, this behavior, and then I can offer compassion. Because really, for me, everyone is struggling in life today. Life is not easy. Whether you're the doctor shopper or even the doctor, we can be very well-to-do or not well-to-do, and yet we're still struggling in ourselves, with our inner world, with our lack of self-esteem, our lack of self-respect, with problems in my life. And I think that, really, if I can emerge that compassion and that love for others, then I can see beyond my own frustrations with the behaviors that are evident. How can I do that? Is it easy? Actually, I think the more I feel close to God, I can offer that much compassion to the other. But if I don't, then it will get to me. I will feel frustrated. I will feel angry. I'll feel, and I become judgmental. And then that person, that patient doesn't get a good vibration from me. Now, easy to talk about, very easy for me to say. And I think this is why really at this time, I need spirituality. I need this connection with God. It gives me the power to be compassionate to such people. Otherwise, I just feel so affected by them and annoyed by them. And that's why I think, really spirituality and a spiritual practice is essential for life today.
Right, so it burns down to really practicing spirituality in action and compassion in action, as you gave us beautiful examples of Dadi Prakashmani as well, that they were the living examples of compassion in action, not just speaking about. Okay. As you opened the new Pandora's box today, you told other people to ask questions and comments. So we have with us Dr. So we have with us Dr. Sujata Sharma, who is a leading psychologist in India and very active member of the medical wing. So I think she raised her hand. So Dr. Sujata, you can please go ahead and ask your question. Here you are. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Manoj Bhai, and thank you, Charlie Bhai, for a most stimulating insight into the various dimensions of compassion. So my question was that we did talk about true compassion as being non-judgmental and not having discrimination. So often we come across people, especially me as a therapist or a counselor, that we come across dysfunctional people who are into abuse or bullying. They can be, on a larger scale, the rapists, the murderers, the aggressors, the dictators. The world is full of such people. So how do we show compassion? I mean, at a very practical one-to-one level, or even at a larger level as an ideology, how do you show compassion towards people who are doing so much wrong? And wouldn't that be validating or encouraging the wrongdoing in some way if we show compassion? So what is the way to show compassion? I feel maybe, is it that we feel compassion with it, but don't say it in so many words? Like your views on that. Thank you.
It's the world to navigate this difficult world is not easy. But I think Shuddhata Ben that why are people like that? They're under the influence of those two other forces inside us. The influence of ego. And the ego says, I'm fine, you're the problem. When ego becomes so great, there's such great body consciousness within me, I'm so disconnected from reality and truth. And so my behavior can be so dominating, bombastic, loud, and yet they're suffering deeply. Such people suffer so deeply within themselves because they don't receive love. There's a law of life that says the more ego I have, the less love I experience. These people don't have any love in life because no one really wants to be around such people. Think of a life without much love. It's a really, really painful life, even though they may seem so successful on other areas in their life. And so, yes, if we're in that very human body conscious level, we react to such people. But if we're spiritually minded, we understand that these people are suffering. And once when I first began my journey with the BKs, I had a job in Melbourne and my boss was an ex-army guy. And honestly, he was one of those people you just go, he was such a dominating, aggressive personality who didn't seem to give respect to anybody. And yet, I took it up as a challenge to sort of see beyond that personality and try to see the soul. It just always he became like a little child. And I realized that was all a facade he'd built up to manage life. When you see life as threatening, then you have to hit first. You have to be dominating. He was actually incredibly sweet underneath that arrogant mask. And it taught me a huge lesson to try to look beyond the mask that people wear, because it can be really off-putting. Because underneath it, all of us are souls. And every human soul needs love. I know theoretically it's easy to say, because sometimes we have to deal with some people who are incredibly difficult in their nature. And as you said, it seems more and more in this world. I sometimes think, and that in a way, when I am bodily conscious, when I'm living under the influence of my ego and my ego of inferiority, it's almost we all have mental health issues. Almost the whole planet, in a sense. The thinking is distorted. The thinking is not clean. And when I become soul conscious and I have that feeling from God, and I have less influence of my ego and my lack of self-respect, then my thinking comes back into a perspective of reality. But in saying all of that, it's not easy. This world is not easy to navigate. And there's so many people who, as you just described so beautifully, are very, very difficult to deal with. And this is why I feel one of the virtues of our time is to be detached, but accurately detached, which means loving, caring, close, but uninfluenced by. In a sense, spiritual purity is about not being influenced by people and events around me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It all boils down to practicing this virtue of detachment, which we had covered actually in the past as well. Another question, a lot of questions coming about. I'll take those first. There are 2, 3 together. It's about if we help other people on the basis of compassion, are we interfering with their karmic accounts?
No, not at all. Because we can often help change the destiny of another person, which is probably one of the most beautiful things to do in life. You know, in the Gita, it really says you are a soul. When the soul takes on a body, whatever you think, speak, or do creates your destiny. And sometimes people are acting under the influence of their karmic destiny. And yet, if I can offer compassion and love, often you can put them on another path that brings them much more happiness. And in a way, I think that's one of the greatest acts spiritually, if I can do that. I've seen it happen on numerous occasions, that especially a lot of the older sisters in the Brahma Kumaris, such elevated souls, because their vision of others is so elevated, people step into their own self-respect. And it's one of the greatest gifts that if I give so much respect to another, they step back into their self-respect. Like I hold the vision of their goodness. That is one of the most powerful things. You don't even have to say much. It's just your attitude holds, you know their capacity. And I can think of one example. When I was in London, there was a person who came to our meditation center, and he gave himself the title, the most negative person in the world. I mean, that's a pretty big title when you think about it. And he, excuse me, he would come to the center in very negative states of mind. And Daddy Janki saw some goodness in him. And she refused to take her vision off that goodness. Daddy Janki was the head of the Brahma Kumaris. She saw his value. And he said later, because she held his inherent goodness, even though he couldn't see it, and he was under the influence of his old story, because she held that vision for him, he stepped back into that vision. And my experience is that that person was one of the most peaceful, gentle people I've ever met. But, you know, because of her influence, her love, his destiny, his karmic story changed, his karmic destiny. Sometimes we can have that much influence on people. And in a way, when we have a relationship with God, it's like I'm going in this direction, and that relationship with God turns me, my whole karmic destiny changes for the better.
Right, so thank you for sharing this story from London. A question coming from London. Someone is asking, how can compassion be tuned right without the other soul feeling their dignity intruded?
Yeah, it's a because I think I was touching on that in a sense, because sometimes compassion can come from a place which is a little bit condescending. It can. It's absolutely true that maybe, you know, I'm okay and you need my compassion. But I think true compassion comes from a place of equality and true love. And I even remember one person telling me that he'd had a falling out with a friend, and they wouldn't speak to each other. And when he began to meditate, he wanted to heal that problem. But when he rang his friend would never answer. He kept sending his friend messages, let's get on, let's let go of the past, etc. But his friend wouldn't answer. And you know, when he looked at himself deeply, he realized he was still holding the thought, I was right and you were wrong. On the surface, he's saying, come on, let's heal the past, let's get on with each other. But deep down, he still felt I was right and you were wrong. And so in other words, sometimes I think that compassion can come from a place of, I don't know, a little bit of ego. And really true compassion holds the absolute dignity of the other party. It's a real vision of equality. It's a soul conscious vision. You are my brother. And as my brother, I have that love, that goodwill, and that support for you.
Right. I'll just take two questions in the interest of time now. You mentioned about Dalai Lama, and I want you to clarify this quote which he has mentioned, that if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion.
Yeah, I think I would say, how do I measure my ego? It's my vision on others. If I'm, you know, I might be quiet, not say much, but if in my mind I'm hypercritical, always seeing fault, why they like this? Why do they behave? I look at them. You know, I mightn't say much. I would say, you know, that's a lot of ego. And I don't give myself happiness and I don't give anyone else happiness. But when I really see virtue in another person, see their goodness, I honestly believe on this spiritual journey, you get to a certain point where you get stuck. And that place of being stuck is when I'm still get caught up in what's wrong with people. You know, this one's like this one's like that. Honestly, you get stuck. It's like a gravity spiritually. To go beyond that gravity, I have to see the goodness. It's a choice because every human soul has faults and virtues. I choose to see the good. And then you feel that happiness. So when you have compassion for yourself and others, you feel better when you see good in people. You know, my own experience is if you're chronically seeing what's wrong with people, what's not good in people, deep down, do you feel good about yourself? You don't. You know, you may justify it, they like this, they like that, but deep down, you know, you don't feel so happy. And you know, when you see the good in other people, you know it's right, it's the truth. It's the way human life works, which is really to offer compassion. It makes you happy. Definitely makes you happy.
Yeah, and just to summarize the last thing, the last question, but I think your talk really told us, it really goes with this saying that love and compassion are necessities in life, not luxuries, because without them humanity just can't survive. And also touching upon Buddha's quotes, you mentioned very rightly, and Buddha also has many quotes on compassion, as you mentioned about loving kindness and compassion, which are the need of the day. But sometimes we forget to have self-compassion. So Buddha said, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So, any tips on how to develop self-compassion?
Yes, I think really have the courage to explore God's love. I think God's love is the most powerful thing that exists. And when I tune into the soul, connect, absorb, resonate with God's love, I think it restores compassion in me and all the self-compassion, because one of my experiences, the biggest obstacle in this spiritual journey is my vision on myself. You know, sometimes other people love me, like me, and yet I can't love and like myself. And we have such a rigid, negative vision on myself. And unless I have compassion on myself, I can't release myself from this jail of self-judgment, self-criticism that it really holds me back. You know, often people really feel bad that someone doesn't like them, has this negative attitude. But actually, it's nothing compared to my own negative attitude towards myself, nothing usually. And when a part of the spiritual journey is to experience God's love, release myself from this prison that I put myself in, which is this very judgmental, critical vision on myself. And that self-compassion does wonders in life, incredible wonders.
Great. Thank you so much once again, Brother Charlie. And just wanted to convey the regards from Dr. Ashok Mehta. He always joins, but he's not able to join because in India, at Shantivan, we are having this mind-body medicine conference going on. Yesterday and today and tomorrow as well, and he's having a session right now as we speak. So he said, please convey my good wishes to Brother Charlie. And now I would request Sister Anu to propose the vote of thanks to Brother Charlie. Over to you, Sister Anu.
Thank you, Manoj brother. Yeah, it is always privilege to hear from Dr. Mehta, but I'll take this opportunity to thank from every participants today. I'm sure you left us to think deeply about, am I compassionate? And what is that stayed with me is that we have to be aware about our own ego, judgments, about myself, about others. And I think that is where staying true to in my self-respect and really connecting with the divine. So it's a big practice, but I think deeper churning and understanding is needed. So thank you so much, Brother Charlie. It's always an honor to listen to you, fortune to understand. So I'm sure all our participants are taking with them. So thank you once again. And before we listen to your meditation, I'll just take a minute to quickly announce the next upcoming programs. So bear with us. So for everyone, as you all know, we always do the values workshop after 1 week on the same value, where we do some experiential reflective exercises. So in order to really understand and strengthen this value. So after a week, we have on 18th of June, Saturday, 7:30 p.m. India time, that's 7 a.m. West Coast, US, Canada, the values workshop on compassion. Other than the experiential exercises, we'll have insightful talk and meditation by Sister Dipti from Johannesburg, South Africa. So please save your date, time, and join us then. And the next session on Values for Life series is episode 42 on simplicity. That's in Hindi, Sadgi. And for that, we'll have Santosh Didi, the director of Brahma Kumaris from St. Petersburg, Russia. She is the joint regional coordinator of Russia, CIS, and Baltic countries region. And I'm sure whoever are regular have heard her. So she will take us to that deep understanding on simplicity. It's happening on Saturday, 25th June, on our regular timing. That's 8 p.m. India time. and that's 7:30 a.m. West Coast US Canada time. And today I want to express my happiness that we have all the Asian participants from China, Malaysia, Asia, because Brother Charlie is joining us from Australia. So we get that fortune once in a while. So please note this, and you can have all the info, joining info and dates on our websites. That's vihasa.in and vancouver.brahmakumaris.ca. You can see the videos of all these classes, even today's session, on our YouTube channels. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Manoj Bhai.
Yeah, before we give it, participants sometimes start leaving and they want a group photo as always, Anu sister. So if we can just, Brother Charlie, we can just take a group photo quickly and then go into meditation so that we don't disturb our meditative state while leaving. So we'll take a group photo first. Just half a minute it will take on the Zoom. So I request all the people to please on their videos. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, everyone, open your video. We'll have the beautiful photo with Brother Charlie. Anyone else who still time? I know people are still coming up, but I got it. Thank you so much. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, so now we'll proceed to the meditation on compassion with Brother Charlie. So I'll play some soft background music that's okay, Brother Charlie? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, yeah.
So thank you so much, Dr. Anu. Thank you, Manoj Bhai. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everyone. I'll just have a few minutes of meditation. I can suggest that we put down devices and phones and distractions. And ask my heart the question, how do I treat myself? Am I loving? Am I caring? Am I gentle? Am I compassionate? Compassion means to live by my truth, to behave in a way that I know is right. And to give respect to my true self. But perhaps sometimes I lose that compassion for myself. I become self-critical, talk down to myself. To fill myself with the power of compassion, let me remember the divine. Visualize yourself as the tiny soul sitting in the front of the brain and the center of the forehead. Just sitting lightly in the forehead. And in this sweet place of soul consciousness, let me visualize God Shiv Baba, the Supreme, is a radiant jewel of light. The ocean of love. Allow yourself to be completely loved. Feel this pure love healing me, holding me. And just observe, the more I taste this love, this love transforms into compassion for myself, for others, even for those who don't cooperate with me, for those who disagree with me. Because I see beyond the disagreement, I see the soul. I see the other is suffering and under the influence of their own story. So I decide to offer the gift of compassion. This gift of compassion, seeing their virtues, having good wishes, is the most precious gift in life. Each time I come in front of another, and I think, what is the gift I want to give you? Let me give this gift of a divine attitude. They will feel uplifted, and I also will feel uplifted. Om Shanti.
So thank you so much, Brother Charlie, once again for your time and meditation as well, and for your deep sharings on compassion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manoj Bhai. Thank you, Dr. Anu. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everybody. It's been great. Thank you so much.